Parents who refuse to support their prepubescent child, adolescent, lose sight of the fact that their loved one needs their support, and they start worrying more about how it's going to impact them. How is this going to impact their social network? They start worrying more about the impact to their lives than worrying about what's best for their loved one. And it takes quite a few meetings to get the parent to move from rejection, to get the needle to move a little bit towards understanding, then to tolerance, then to a little bit more towards acceptance prior to moving into full affirmative support. Some, it'll never move.
What do you really know about people who are born transgender? Have you ever met someone who's transgender? Well, if you're like me, you're curious but hesitant to ask questions. Well, welcome to Demystifying the Transgender Journey. In our conversations with people who were born transgender, their families, friends, and the professionals who support them, we ask probing questions and discover insightful and educational answers. You can also find more information on our website, thetransgenderjourney.com. Now let's get right into today's episode. Well, hello, and welcome to another episode of Demystifying the Transgender Journey, brought to you by Women Who Push the Limits. Thank you so much for being here, tuning in, and being part of our community. And we're exploring powerful stories, unique perspectives, and authentic journeys. And we're grateful that you're with us today. So I'm Lynn Murphy, author, speaker, leadership coach, founder of Women Who Push the Limits. And my co-host today, as always, thankfully, is Wendy Cole, a transition mentor and a coach specializing in assisting individuals as they're navigating significant life changes. Because she navigated her own significant life change at 67 years old when she transitioned. So our goal is to provide stories and educational content to help counter the misinformation and the disinformation and the terrible things that are going on and are so prevalent in our society today. And as Wendy always says, we're striving to humanize the transgender experience by introducing you to real people who were born transgender, their families, friends, and healthcare professionals. And we are so excited to welcome back to the show Dr. Diana Sorrentino. She's a nationally recognized expert on gender diversity and transgender identity, and she's the author of several influential books, including Transgender Families, making her a leading voice in the intersection of science, medicine, and her own lived experience as an affirmed woman with dual doctoral degrees in sociology and psychology. So Dr. Sorrentino, thank you for coming back to our show and for sharing your extensive research, your expertise, your amazing lived experience. And we appreciate you helping us and our audience learn more today about gender diversity and transgender identities.
Honor and privilege to be back. Appreciate spending some quality time with you.
We just very much appreciate it, Dr. Sorrentino. So to set the stage for the conversation that we're going to have, please share with our audience your background, because you share it so much better than I do.
Well, as Lynn has already shared, I have doctoral degrees in sociology and psychology. And my professional work covers a couple of different spectrums. I work with the parents of adolescents who are pursuing their gender affirmation to help them better understand gender diversity and an individual being transgender from the biological, physiological, neurological perspective, providing them with an educational foundation for understanding, which then helps lead to acceptance. I work with adults, typically 25 plus, who finally have reached the point that they are going to be pursuing their gender affirmation. And I help guide and coach and work with them through that entire process. Remaining on that side of the coin, I provide professional development training for other psychologists, social workers, counselors, physicians, pediatricians, and the like. Now, the other side of my coin is the corporate world, where I will help companies with their employee transition. And as I mentioned in our prelude, establishing the basis to work with an organization to assist them and their employees with a male to female adult transition on the job. I also host and produce a podcast entitled Paradoxes of Gender. It's accessible through my website, paradoxesofgender.com. And as Lynn was so kind to share, I'm an author of several books. First being Transgender Families, which was written specifically for the parents and families of transitioning individuals. My second book is The Neurobiology and Physiology of Incongruent Gender Identities and Sexual Orientations. It's basically a biology textbook for graduate studies. And the third is Adolescent Gender Affirming Medical and Behavioral Healthcare, focusing on the needs of the professionals in the healing profession, but also tremendous amount of information above and beyond for the families and transitioning individuals from my first book, Transgender Families. My life's evolution, as I like to refer to it, took place in January of 1990, 35 years ago. I have been researching and studying this subject for 40 plus years, as well as providing training to the professionals within the community and working with a very diverse group of individuals. So that's beyond a thumbnail sketch, but it gives you an idea of my background, who I am, and what I do. And between the academics, training, research, publications, being an affirmed woman is like a lasso that ties all the loose ends together to bring a unique perspective of knowledge and experience to the work I do, whether it's in the corporate side or on the clinical side. Because 35 years of lived experience is hard to top.
Right.
Well, you are the expert. I wanted the audience to understand who we're speaking with today if they haven't seen your previous episodes, because it's so important that they know where you're coming from and that this is what's real. This is what's scientific that we're going to talk about today. And this is from personal
Not
experience.
anecdotal. This is
No.
hardcore research.
I think it is just so critically important that people like yourself are involved in this because, as you said in one of the things in your website, without that lived experience, you don't have the full picture.
So let's get into today's conversation. And in your book, Transgender Families, you say no one transitions alone. In fact, that's part of the subtitle of your book. So today we wanted to talk about children and families and parents and partners and how this all affects everybody because nobody transitions alone. And in a previous episode, you went into the biology of gender very clearly. If people haven't seen that, I hope that they will listen to that too. Maybe before they listen to this one, but I hope they listen to that one. But let's just start by defining gender, not as deeply as we've defined it before, but give us a brief definition. What does gender really mean? Because we hear so many horrible things that don't make any sense.
Gender is diametrically opposed from sex. Sex is the biology, the XY chromosome, the XX chromosome, hormones, and the like. Gender is how we see ourselves mentally and psychologically and emotionally. And that perspective can never be changed. In our previous episode, I talked quite a bit about prenatal development and how fetus in early development is universally female, even if it has an XY chromosome. And out in the latter part of the third trimester, there's a process where the brain will become masculinized and the child is born phenotypically male and the brain is male. If there are deviations due to variant genes and that does not occur, the brain remains in the female state. Or vice versa, if it's an XX fetus, brain has to be prevented from becoming masculinized. Now, to drive this point home, because this can be a lot for individuals to comprehend. There was a case in 1966. Twin boys were born in Winnipeg, Canada. During a circumcision, one of the boys' penises was so irrevocably damaged it could not be repaired. The child was brought to Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, and the professionals there convinced the family, the parents, that nurturing was more powerful than nature and that they could raise this child as a girl, even though it was born phenotypically male, and it would work. And the child would never know the difference. The title of the book is As Nature Made Him. It did not work. The point being is this child had a male brain, and you cannot turn that male brain female, no matter how hard you try. When an individual's gender identity is incongruent with their sex assignment at birth, it's locked in for life. It is not going to change.
So when children are experimenting with gender at a young age, what age do they start knowing that they're not the sex that they were born?
What's very important for parents to understand, and when I'm referred to parents because of gender behavioral attitudes or play in their prepubescent child, I tell them that gender fluidity, cross-gender role play is a very normal part of prepubescent early childhood development. And unless the child is having identity dysphoria or there's problems with behavior, you ride the wave, because by 7 or 8, that behavior is going to dissipate as that prepubescent child is getting closer to pre-adolescence and puberty. They start spending more time with their same-sex peers. You have other children, ages 3 to 5, who may come out and definitively say, I'm not a girl, I'm a boy. I'm not a boy, I'm a girl. Very high probability that this child is going to be transgender. Again, you ride the wave. Allow the child to express themselves. Prior to puberty, there is no medical, there is no surgical intervention whatsoever. If behavioral issues become a problem, then a child psychologist who's trained to work with prepubescent children may be appropriate for the behavior, but not the gender presentations that are being made.
So what kind of behavioral issues would be caused by them being a different gender than their sex assigned at birth?
The behavioral issues universally develop when the parents or family are forcing that prepubescent child to conform with their sex assignment at birth, rather than allowing them to explore their behavior and their self-attributed identity. If the assigned sex male at birth wants to wear a dress at age 5, you allow it. It's when you force the child to conform to the stereotypical norms is when the behavioral issues will typically begin to surface.
But if you allow them to express this and to experiment with it, it either goes away or it doesn't. Is that what you're saying?
Well, the 3 to 5-year-old who definitively says they are a gender which is different than their sex assignment at birth, that is not going to go away.
Yeah.
Okay. If they're tolerated, their anxiety will increase as they begin to approach the age for puberty. Because if it's an assigned female at birth who may be transitioning to male, who has definitively said, I'm not a girl, I'm a boy, The thought of breast development is going to weigh heavily on their emotions. The potential for having a period is going to weigh heavily. One of the psychologists I work with has a 10-year-old daughter. There's no gender identity issue there. This child's 10 and she's had her first period already. For the male, assigned male at birth who's transitioning or would be transitioning to female, development of the Adam's apple, the deepening of the voice, the development of facial hair is the beginning of their anxiety. And whether it's for the assigned female at birth or male at birth, this is where puberty blockers would prove to be appropriate following medical and psychological evaluations. Now you have others who, in that prepubescent range, may show cross-gender role play, gender fluid behavior. They're not on the path to transitioning male to female, female to male, but it does not dissipate at age 7, 8, or 9. These are the ones who will typically be gay or lesbian. So there are many flows to those early childhood years. Behavioral issues, anxiety, gender dysphoria will typically surface when they're being forced to conform to a stereotypical role.
That's exactly what happened to me. My parents forced me to conform all the way through. I resisted and I was punished. And then by the time I hit 10, I couldn't stop telling them that I was a girl.
Well, and one of the things that I read from your book, Dr. Sorrentino, and I'm going to quote this because I think it's important. The very first year of a child's life are critical for the early emotional, psychological, physical, and neurobiological growth and development of the child. The foundation years, which have been determined to be fundamental in developing a solid foundation for their future health and well-being throughout their lifetime. Now, if parents could understand that, but parents are going to be confused. They don't get a handbook that tells them what to do if their child is saying, I'm a boy, not a girl, or vice versa.
There's an excellent book, and it's part of my library in the other room, Complex Trauma and Dissociation in Childhood, and the long-term negative impact that that complex trauma will have on everything you just read from my other book. It exemplifies the issues associated with adverse childhood experiences experienced during prepubescence, whether it's emotional, psychological, physical abuse, sexual abuse, or even just being within a household where there's domestic violence, alcohol or drug abuse, or a revolving door of unpleasant visitors. The impact on that child's development is significant and will last their lifetime and has been proven to be the basis for problems with cardiovascular disease, weight, diabetes, inability to recover from illnesses, and the list goes on.
I can definitely relate to that. They're gone though. After this, they're gone.
So if a child doesn't recognize exactly what's going on, maybe there's no representation. Maybe they're in a household or in a school where books are banned. They can't get positive representations of someone who is transgender. They don't know what's going on. The parents don't know what's going on. So it's unrecognized. What happens to the child's development if that's the case, if they truly are transgender?
Well, this falls under the umbrella of adverse childhood experiences. And we could do several programs just on ACEs.
Mm.
The concept of adverse childhood experiences, the research began in the 1990s. Kaiser Permanente wanted to conduct a study out in California because they had a large enough panel of patients and diversity to look at the adults in their panel and study through interviews and through other testing their experiences during prepubescent childhood and early adolescence and the impact it would have on their current health. They partnered with the Centers for Disease Control to come up with structured guidelines for this. And Kaiser Permanente was very influential because they had such a large patient population. And they were astounded by what the research produced for them and how many pathological issues with health were all tied to early adverse childhood experiences, especially emotional, psychological problems, in addition to physiological. The study's been replicated and reinforced by other organizations. Cedars-Sinai conducted their own study. It's been validated through countless peer reviews. It's solid scientific and medical evidence. Problems in childhood. And that book that I just mentioned, advanced trauma and dissociation, can lead to manic episodes, dissociative identities, and so much more.
And we'll talk about this when we get to adolescence too, but suicidal ideations, I think.
Most definitely. In the pre-adolescent age group, the suicidal ideation exists, the suicidality, which is more generic. They're more likely to pursue self-inflicted, non-suicidal injuries. It could be cutting, it could be biting their lip, it could be banging their head against the wall, inflicting pain upon themselves to distract from the psychological and the emotional distress that they're experiencing. As they move into earlier or later adolescence, the suicidal ideation then becomes much more prevalent. 70% on average, and the death by suicide rate is 20% plus. But what's interesting is whether it's the prepubescent child or the adolescent, when they are supported by their parents and family in regard to their incongruent gender identity and pursuit of a gender affirmation, their potential for suicidal ideation or death by suicide is actually lower than their cisgender peers.
That's an amazing statistic. So let's talk about specifics that parents can do to encourage this, to help their child be as healthy and as sane as possible.
Parents need psychological education. The parents are not going to be in a position to assist the prepubescent child or the adolescent with affirming support until they learn and understand what their child or adolescent is experiencing. This is where WPATH, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, plays a very important role because you have psychologists and counselors who've been trained and certified by WPATH, and the website is wpath.org. And their Standards of Care 8, which was published in 2022, is available online for free as a download PDF, and it's broken into sections. It is an excellent resource for parents. What I will caution parents, if they're looking for support from a professional, whether it's through Psychology Today or many other platforms, checking a box, oh, I'll work with transgender patients, I'll work with gay and lesbian, does not necessarily qualify a person. I receive calls frequently from psychologists who, in a dead end, don't know what to do with their client. And one of them, I had a conversation with about the treatment paradigm they were using. And I asked them, are you a member of WPATH? And they go, what's WPATH? Okay. That's not somebody you want to work with. So Finding credible information online is not too difficult, but the problem is you've got to get through the noise and the misinformation. That's why I recommend the Standards of Care 8 from WPATH. No cost. It's about 500 pages.
Mhm.
You download it as a PDF and you read the
Right.
chapters or print the pages you only want to read. Once the parents have support to develop an understanding, then it becomes easier to provide affirmative support for their adolescent or their prepubescent child. Otherwise, they're chasing a ghost in the room.
Mhm.
I conducted a program a few years ago for a chapter of the Society for Human Resource Management on paradoxes of gender in the workplace. After which a gentleman approached me looking so distraught, saying, I'm living this. I'm living this. I mean, the man was
Mhm.
almost ready to cry.
Right.
Now, I acknowledged during the program that I was an affirmed woman. He goes, I want to support my child. I want to support my child. I love my child, but I don't understand this. Sat him down, asked him, how old is the child? 17. I did not correct him, but that's not a child, that's an adolescent. And in
Right.
my conversation with him, I always used child because I wanted him to understand that I was hearing and listening. What was the sex assignment at birth? Male, transitioning to female. I went through some of the basics. He asked me so many questions about my own life. And you could just watch the stress and the strain drain out of him as he was provided with information that made sense,
Mhm.
gave him a foundation of understanding. At which point he said, well, why doesn't my child tell me this? I said, because your 17-year-old is still trying to work things out for themselves.
Your child doesn't know.
So I referred him to episodes of my podcast. I recommended my book. I spent an hour and a half with him. He was so appreciative. I offered to have him and his wife come to the office. No fee, no obligation. He said, thank you, but I think I'll pass for now. But what was really sweet is I went to do another program. He left the hall. And when I was done, I was leaving the building and he's outside having a cigarette. I wished him well. And as I'm crossing the street, he turns to me and says, Dr. Sorrentino, you're a woman with a big heart. I could have melted right there. But
Wow.
how can a parent provide effective affirmative support, lacking understanding as to why there's the incongruence in that child or adolescent from their sex assignment at birth? When I've had an opportunity to sit with parents, and it's more than one conversation, and as we've discussed in your previous episodes, the neurobiology, the physiology, the psychological aspects, it's rooted from day one and it
Mhm.
develops in utero. And we've been a part of civilizations for thousands of years.
And it's
And
all part of the socialization from our parents that drives us to the point where we feel bad about who we are without even expressing it to them the first time.
uh,
I knew when I expressed it to my parents at 10 that it probably wasn't going to go well for me, but I couldn't hold back. And
I,
then in 2015, late 14, when I started searching for a therapist, I wrote to clinics a fairly detailed email all around Montgomery County and Bucks County. Is anyone willing to work with me? I only got 2 responses. And I've found since through talking with my clients, a lot of psychologists have no clue how to deal with this.
well, they're not trained. Here's a classic example. 2011, there was a research study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. A survey was done of the 135 medical schools in the United States, specifically focusing on gender diversity and transgender issues. In a nutshell, what it boiled down to is of the 16 specific categories and subcategories part of the survey, only 8% of the schools covered all 16 categories in their educational programs. The remaining schools, on average, contributed no more than 5 hours of either academic or clinical training on LGBTQ, gender diverse, transgender, or adolescent gender identity issues. These individuals are being put into practice with no training. Now, it's improved somewhat. I have done programs for physicians and psychologists, and they just sit there, and it's like, they had no idea. There's one of the medical centers in my area. I was invited to come in and speak to the residents who were pursuing family practice, because inevitably part of their panels would be individuals. It was a couple-hour program. I did it as a conversation, no death by PowerPoint. There were good questions, but you could just see the awe on their face, like, we had no idea.
Well, the children, the youth, the people who are experiencing this frequently don't have any idea what's going on. And I try not to get on my soapbox too much, but in these areas where books are banned and things are not allowed, they're so confined. What does that do to a child who doesn't understand, has no representation?
My own experience and so many of the adults that I've worked with, through my prepubescence, I felt different. I couldn't explain what it was. I just felt different. Now, we're talking the 60s here. When puberty kicked in, that's when it hit me like a tsunami. Things didn't fit. And I started experimenting on how I would look as a girl. We're talking 1966 here. I was 12 years old. Where do you go
I
for
did it in 1959.
So we go through a lot of turmoil because there was no information available. How do you relate? How do you sit down with a mom or dad and say, this is what I'm experiencing, what I'm feeling, when you have no clue what it is? But the kicker for me is when I was ready to do my formal evolution, sat down with my mom, and after the full explanation, she looked at me and she said, this makes perfect sense. I went, what do you mean? She said, I always knew you were different, didn't know why you were different, but this fits. This makes perfect sense. Mothers tend to know.
Right.
But getting back to what we covered earlier, how can a parent provide positive, affirmative, loving, unconditional support for their prepubescent child or adolescent when they have no understanding of why their loved one is feeling the way they do, is expressing an incongruent gender identity? So it's always important to start there. And the parents can look for help. There are more qualified individuals today. And that's why I also bring up WPATH, because you can reach out to WPATH and they'll give you a list of qualified psychologists and counselors.
And some parents don't have the means to hire a therapist, but also some parents, I'm thinking, would be afraid of what people would think. There's so much of the fear and the shame around, and we talked about this before, what did the parent do? If they don't want to let anybody see what's going on. I appreciate you talking about WPAT, because then they can get some information there. But what happens with those parents?
Well, you've touched on a very important element. Parents who refuse to support their prepubescent child or adolescent lose sight of the fact that their loved one needs their support, and they start worrying more about how it's going to impact them. How are
Mhm.
they going to tell the grandparents? How are they going to tell their friends and family? How is this going to impact their social network? How is it going to impact their work? They start worrying more about the impact to their lives
Mhm.
than worrying about what's best for their loved one. And unfortunately, in too many of these situations, they throw the kid out of the house.
Mhm.
Exactly.
Now, you
Yeah.
talk about trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then we wonder why those kids or adolescents who are thrown out of the house are having a difficult time.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
So
That's cruel.
I've had the opportunity, and it takes quite a few meetings to get the parent to move from rejection, to get the needle to move a little bit towards understanding, then to tolerance, then a little bit more towards acceptance prior to moving into full affirmative support. Some, it'll never move.
Well, how do you even get parents to come to you or to come to someone or to pick up a book and read about this? Some of them I would think would be so set that,
Oh,
what would the
they're there. It's
neighbors
just that
think?
it's extremely rare that both parents are that hardcore.
Oh, that's good to hear.
It could be one or the other. Sometimes it's the mother, more commonly, it's the father. So the mother will come and set up an appointment with me, and then eventually get the father to come. If the father is willing to come in with an open mind, it takes time, we can break the ice.
Okay.
There's one father I met with in January. His mom brought him in to meet me. Refuses to come back for another meeting. He just doesn't want to deal with it.
Hmm. I'm sure there are a lot like that. So,
Mother's concerned. She goes, my child is now 11, entering puberty. They want to transition. Is this a dead end for them? And as I explained to the mother, considering all of the young adults and adults like myself who transitioned later in life, it's not a dead end. It's not the end of the world. Puberty kicks in 10 to 12, 14, determined male or female, but it doesn't end at 18. There are options. At 18, your loved one can do whatever they want, because if both parents are not in agreement, it just creates more distress and more turmoil. But when I shared with the mom all of the adults I've worked with, not to mention my own story of evolution, even if your child at age 18 starts with the hormones and the blockers, whatever the case may be that would be appropriate, they're still light years ahead of individuals in their 20s, 30s, and 40s or later. But what it does is it puts the child, the adolescent or the prepubescent, in the middle of a family battle.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to talk about adverse childhood experiences,
Oh, yeah. That's horrendous.
advanced trauma, complex trauma.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
And they'll be dealing with that the rest of their life, trying to quiet it down.
And because one or both parents, it's usually just one, is more concerned about themselves than their loved one.
My father specifically wanted a son to carry on the family name and wouldn't hear of anything other than that.
and that's sad. I'm not a parent, but thinking what parent wouldn't want their child to be happy,
Mm-hmm.
that they would think more of themselves than they do of their child. But obviously that's a situation that happens a lot.
Family I worked with from out of state, by age 5, their prepubescent child, assigned male at birth, definitively said, I'm a girl, I'm not a boy, period, end of discussion. Took a while, but mom and dad got on board, provide support. As this individual approached stage 10, I want puberty blockers.
Hmm.
The psychologist cleared the individual, the physician cleared. What was beautiful is she had the parent support, grandparents support, the aunts and uncles supported. And when time for her surgeries, breast enhancement and vaginoplasty, because insurance wouldn't cover it, all the family pitched in to cover the costs.
Hmm.
This young woman is now 24. She graduated college with honors.
Mhm.
She's drop dead gorgeous.
Of course.
Has a boyfriend,
Yep.
sexually active. And it was funny because in conversation with mom one day, she goes, "It works. It works." Regarding the vaginoplasty.
There you
So
go.
it was quite an experience for me to work with that family for so many years. And we've stayed in touch.
And she's going to grow up to be such a well-adjusted, productive member of society.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Wish there were more of those.
I
Well,
wish I'd had that.
there are, but we don't hear about them.
Yeah, I guess we hear about the problems, don't we?
Yes.
My experience with talking with parents is that they're actually more closeted than someone like I was before I transitioned.
Oh, yeah.
Fear and protection of their child is the main key.
But they go about it the wrong way.
Exactly.
Or
And that's
no.
because of our societal socialization that we've been subjected to for centuries.
Well, you have family history, you have societal influences, you have cultural influences,
Mhm.
intergenerational influences.
Mhm.
But we have to remember, majority of societies and cultures globally do not conflate sex and gender the way we do, or West,
Exactly.
because this whole heteronormative gender
Mhm.
binary originated in Western Europe.
Mhm. And that's what needs to change.
Well, it can and it will, but
Mhm.
it's
It's going to
going
be slow.
it's going to take time. How many decades did it take for society to become more accepting, not just tolerant, of gays and lesbians?
4 or 5 decades, easily.
Right? And then you have folks who believe that gender diversity and transgender identities are a 20th or 21st century phenomenon, when in fact it's been part of societal history, cultures, and indigenous tribes for thousands of years.
And I'll direct people to a previous episode we did with you, Dr. Sorrentino, where we went into detail with that, the different cultures. It was fascinating to hear how long and how varied the acceptance of people who were born transgender. Nothing new, is it?
Yeah, most definitely not. And when those 16th, 17th century settlers came to the North American continent from Western Europe, they were shocked by two things when they encountered the indigenous tribes. First was the tribes spoke English. The second is they had transgender and gender fluid or gender diverse individuals in very prominent positions within the tribes.
Mhm.
Shamans, tribal leaders. And of the
Mhm.
570 federally recognized indigenous tribes in North America, all of these variant identities are just a natural part of their culture.
Because it's human.
It's just human. It's what we are, what humans are.
Well, let me just add this about the prepubescent child,
Okay.
or the onset of puberty, or the introduction of puberty blockers. For that prepubescent child, age 3, 4, or 5, who definitively says, "I'm not a girl, I'm a boy, I'm not a boy, I'm a girl," they will be allowed to socially transition. Name, and presentation. No medication, no hormones, no surgeries, nothing. It's advantageous to be able to do that in early prepubescent childhood for that definitive alternative gender identity, because it allows for a smoother evolution into school and the like. When an earlier adolescent or late pubescent is transitioning officially, we usually like to say, make the change over the summer or between middle school and high school so that it's an easier, smoother transition. And I cover aspects in my book, Transgender Families, on how to work with schools, what information to request, how information is going to be maintained as confidential, and the like.
Yeah, I read through that and there's some amazing information there that's very, very helpful.
I recently was contacted by a woman that knew me from PA, and turns out her child, assigned male at birth, is going to transition to female after high school and before college. I referred your book to them,
Thank you.
and I know it will be of tremendous help.
Especially about privacy, maintaining privacy and safety for the children, for the child, and for the family. So I highly recommend the book too.
Mhm.
I've received such wonderful, positive feedback from mothers and parents who have purchased the book. I was conducting a seminar for the League of Women Voters. There were about 50 people in attendance. And a woman approached me at the end of the program. She said, my sister has a transgender male to female child. She bought your book. She said it was a lifesaver.
Mhm.
The book was written for parents and families.
Yeah.
Because there's plenty of material for the individual transitioning. There's plenty of material for the professionals. The void that I found was information focused on mom and dad, family, help them understand what's taking place, which is why I wrote the book in 6 parts.
And the book is long. I mean, it's thick. I will show,
It's 370 pages.
and I
Right.
have all my markers. But this is what I will say about it is it's very easy to read. It's very understandable. It's very practical. It's easy to read. It's a remarkable book. It's a remarkable resource, and we will definitely put the link in our show notes for that, Dr.
And
Sorrentino.
thank you so much for doing that. It's
Well,
so
one other thing
important.
about the book is if you look at the appendix,
Mm, yes.
website links, there's books to read, there's organizations that you can reach out to. So it's more than just what I wrote. There's supplemental information that the parent needs that they can find useful, credible, reliable knowledge that they need. And of
So
course,
it's
they always call me.
it's a very small investment for an enormous amount of value.
Wealth of information.
So thank you. So we will look forward to another interview with you at a later date to go into some of the other things in there, because I don't know if people could see, but I had lots of tabs in there. There's lots to talk about. Before we sign off today, is there anything more that you would like to say?
I think we've covered quite a bit tonight. And for the most part, we really didn't even move out of prepubescent childhood.
Right.
A little bit about adolescence, a little bit about the adult, but it's that, I'll say complicated, but it's not really complicated, but it's a very broad spectrum of knowledge based on where an individual is and what their needs are going to be. Do you have any residual questions for me, Lynn?
I have lots of questions for you, and I think we will shortly end this for tonight and try and twist your arm into coming back for another conversation, because there's so much I would like to go into about the adolescents and the adults, and even compare that to transitioning as a child. But I think we will wind up this one tonight.
You will not need to twist my arm. Just
Okay,
let me know
thank
when
you.
you would like me to come back, coordinate our schedule, and it'll be a done deal.
Well, and we'll
Thank
entice
you.
our audience with that too. That's the way we're going to keep them coming back, to get them to subscribe and to like and to share our episodes out, so that they know that they can come back and hear you another time, sharing all this wonderful information.
Most of this you'll find on my podcast.
Right.
And tell us again the URL for your podcast. We'll put that in the show notes.
Well, it's Paradoxes of Gender, and the easiest way to access it is through my website, paradoxesofgender.com. However, the podcasts are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Audible, Google Audio, and 30 other platforms globally. There is no advertising, there's no subscription fee. It was developed to support physicians, psychologists, and counselors, help them with their educational needs. But the information is relevant to anyone of interest who wants to tune in.
So no excuse for people not finding you.
Well, the beauty of the website is it'll be listed based on the publication date on the podcast page of the website, and a brief description of the content. So you can actually scroll through, find what you're interested in, click the hot link, and boom, you have the podcast. And it's an MP3 format, so you can download it. This month, I will be recording my 60th podcast, because it's only every 2 weeks. A lot of work to put them together. I don't have to tell you.
Yes, we know.
You know,
But I have subscribers now in close to 90 countries.
wonderful, wonderful. Well, we'll help advertise your podcast, and I know you'll help advertise
And your
ours.
books.
That's what Wendy and I are all about, is making sure people are educated, learning to use some critical thinking when they hear some of this stuff.
Sharing information.
Because so much of the stuff that we're hearing on social media and on the news and the politicians is just not true. And that's where we're bringing the real stories of real people.
That's why I like to say, dispelling the myths, the hyperbole, the pathological assumptions, and the geopolitical arrogance.
And bullshit.
That's
That
very
too.
well said, both of you. That's very well said. All right, well, let's wind this up for tonight. So we'll thank our audience for joining us for another episode of Demystifying the Transgender Journey. I'm your host, Lynn Murphy and Wendy Cole. We just so appreciate you being here and liking, subscribing, sharing this out. There's so many people who need to hear this, who maybe don't even know they need to hear this. So share it out and set your notifications so you know the next time we have an episode, and you will hear Dr. Sorrentino in several episodes. So thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for being part of a community of sharing this information. And remember, until next time, stay curious and stay kind. Thank you for joining us today on this episode of Demystifying the Transgender Journey. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode of our fascinating interviews. You can also find more information on our website, thetransgenderjourney.com. So until next time, stay curious and stay kind.